Yeah, that's great. And all of what's happening right now is in the recording, so I can throw at the beginning that I have ultimately forced you to put the awkward top button on your shirt for the sake of the interview. So thank you.
All right. Then I'm not like an uptight accountant,
No.
right?
Well, we are going to talk about your journeys into the psychedelic realm. So even if you are an uptight accountant, you're an interesting one to say the least. Hello, everyone. This is James Jesso, your host for the Adventures Through the Mind podcast. This is episode 98 featuring Bruce Sanguin. Before I read Bruce's bio, I would like to make the announcement that I will be doing a small speaking tour in Alberta in June to July. This includes a talk in Calgary and a talk at two different music festivals, Rainbow Fiddle, which is in Alberta, north of Edmonton, and Astral Harvest Festival, which is also in Alberta, like way further north, way further north of Edmonton. And I'll be doing a talk about rehabilitating from bad trips, and I will a talk on the connection between psilocybin experiences and increased capacities for compassion, and how compassion and the skill of suffering help us better adult when life calls on us to adult, and what all of that means. So if you would like to get involved and come check me out in Alberta, please do. You can find details linked in the description to this video, or by heading to jameswjesso.com/events, where you will also find some information about other upcoming speaking situations in different parts of the world. So yeah, head over there and check that out. All right, so let's get into it. Bruce Sanguin is a psychotherapist living on Denman Island, British Columbia, where he practices. Before taking early retirement, he was a minister in a progressive church for 28 years and now works as a guide with individuals who make pilgrimages to the island, or via Skype, for intensive sessions and integration therapy with plant medicines. He is also an internationally renowned speaker in the field of evolutionary spirituality and the author of 7 acclaimed books related to evolving spirituality. His latest is Dismantled: How Love and Psychedelics Broke a Clergyman Apart and Put Him Back Together, which is essentially the topic for the discussion of this episode. In Dismantled, Bruce does an excellent job explaining how our early childhood experiences inform and define our adult perceptions of the world and of ourselves, and how all of that influences our behavior, and then goes into specific reference around the role psychedelics have played in helping him sort of go back into those wounds and see how they affected him as an adult, and to essentially go back and change these things. There's a heavy focus on the importance of relationships in wounding and in healing, as well as a pretty in-depth discussion about the role of spirituality and religion in helping to further reinforce the negative consequences of early childhood wounding, and also a fairly in-depth discussion about where psychedelic therapy comes into all of this. I really enjoyed Bruce's book, really enjoyed his book, and have recommended it to multiple people now, as I am essentially recommending it to you through this interview. And I really enjoyed having this conversation with Bruce. It's one of the podcasts that I feel like I'll look back on and feel really accomplished having produced for y'all, the listeners, and I guess for the larger psychedelic culture over time. And so, of course, I feel very accomplished bringing it to you now with the new camera that you might be just seeing for the first time. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might have seen it in my recent video that I shot talking about my experience being interviewed on Fox News. But yeah, I'm using the new camera, so feeling happy to bring that. You know what? This is an unnecessary line of topic, so I'm just going to drop it here. You know about the camera now. You know about the YouTube. It's fine. Big thanks to my patrons on Patreon. Oh my God, you make it possible. Thank you for helping me to have enough of an income to save up to buy this new camera. And we're all benefiting. So thank you very much, especially to the people whose names are listed on the screen here who give significantly every month. Their names are also listed with explicit thank yous in the description to this episode, wherever you might find it. Big thanks to all my patrons, though, because even just the smallest donation, well, anything is something. So big thanks to everyone who is putting a little bit of money every month into helping this show essentially exist for the benefit of everyone else who enjoys it. If you listening/watching on YouTube are not yet a patron, I would love for you to throw me the equivalent of a cup of coffee once a month, and it would be really helpful because it's not necessarily about what every individual gives, but it is really about the larger collective whole of people adding their little bits in, sort of the emergent sum of donation or patronage that helps me to have a reliable income and to invest time and money into producing the show for you. So if you would like to become a patron, please do by heading to jameswjesso.com/support, where you will learn about Patreon, as well as opportunities to donate otherwise, such as through PayPal or some form of crypto. Additionally, you could purchase some merch of some variety. I have some lectures and ebooks and t-shirts and art up for sale on the shop at jameswjesso.com/shop, which is also a great way to support by both throwing some money into the pot, but also getting some cool swag that you could show off to your friends, perhaps. So that's it for support stuff. Thank you very much for doing so. I could not continue to make this show without the voluntary generosity of my patrons and of people who are essentially investing in the show. So huge thanks. That's it for the intro. Please enjoy this interview with Bruce Sanguin here on Adventures Through the Mind.
Right.
And your audio is strong. My audio is good. And great. How are you doing today, Bruce?
It's a good day. I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm on a bit of a speaking tour of the U.S. Midwest here, hitting 4 or 5 spots. Having nothing to do with this psychedelic realm, however, but to do with my previous life that is, still, there still get invitations to come and talk about my life as a theologian and, church guy.
Let's not get into your former life yet because, like a lot of people, at least people in the psychedelic scene or in the, poorly referenced, but sort of self-help, personal transformation, sort of shtick culture in the world, your life story is inseparable from what you've learned and what you've formulated as a conceptual or theoretical model to understand psychology or understand developmental wounding. But I don't want to go into your story just yet. I'd like to start maybe with a general overview of where you're coming from in the sense of theoretically. When I read your book, I really felt that at first I felt like, okay, yeah, this is pretty general stuff because I'm pretty familiar with it. But then each page, each part as it progressed got deeper, more complex, more far-reaching, and always the next step on a foundation that was so well established that it wasn't a leap to go into these very complex levels. It all felt very intuitive and very organic. So I appreciate that. And some of the foundations of it, and please, correct, expand, confirm what I've got right and what I've got wrong here, is that our early life experiences, in particular, the dynamic, the emotional, psychological, social dynamics between us and our parents, forge how we perceive ourselves, who we perceive ourselves to be, the world around us, and our place in the world as adults. So later adult perception is very much informed by our early childhood experiences, and where our early childhood experiences lacked the love we needed to grow into our authenticity, is a place where there's a wound, and around that wound we have some sort of compensational structure to prevent us from feeling that those wounds, which later as an adult we perceive to be accurate interpretations of context, as well as who we actually really are. And you formulated a very interesting way of not only languaging that, but being able to discover those aspects of ourselves. So kind of riffing off what I just said there, how would you present your sort of theoretical model for the mind and developmental conditioning?
Well, first of all, well done, James.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, you really captured what I discovered to be true. Of course, Freud's been talking about the psychodynamic, this model of the human being for over 100 years. But what I discovered in the medicine that he got it just about right in some ways, but as you say, based on my own experience, it kind of came to me to articulate in a particular way. And kind of as a recap of what you just said, I discovered that in response to early, just call it heartbreak. I mean, you can talk about trauma, and that's sort of a buzzword these days, but absolutely, trauma, emotional, psychological trauma, where, essentially that means we showed up for love, we showed up for deep connection. We were all in, soul incarnates into this world. It's like, bring it on. And then we discover that those who are charged with loving us, with our sustenance, with the emotional connection, aren't available in one way or another, or are actually abusive because of their own traumatic backgrounds. And it's heartbreaking. And the feelings associated with that heartbreak as little ones are actually unbearable, like literally unbearable. And it's one thing to talk about this theoretically, but when I was in various forms of medicine, psychedelic medicine, I actually was stripped down so that I was feeling the rawness of this experience. So it was like I was experiencing it for the first time, how it was, and discovered the meaning of sorrow, which I sort of intellectually could talk about. But this was like, I was sorrow incarnate. And then discovered that in response to these unbearable feelings, we unconsciously formulate what I call beliefs, unconscious beliefs, core unconscious beliefs, that are, in a way, premature conclusions, but intelligent conclusions based on our early experience of the nature of reality, the nature of self, and the nature of other. So we come to conclusions such as, I am bad, I am wrong, it's my fault, I'm too much, I'm not enough, if I don't do what you want, you're going to kill me. There are just multiple, when I started doing this work, basically I came up with 25 or 30 that were just based on my experience that got ingrained in me. And then these beliefs, along with the associated feelings, are really too much to bear. We can't survive and feel these. And so we do something very intelligent, and that is we compensate for them through what I just call compensating or compensatory actions and beliefs. So again, in a couple of different ceremonies, I saw in a flash the ways in which I structured my personality and my way of being in the world in such a way that enabled me to repress these feelings and unconscious beliefs and carry on. So I developed a personality that the core concern of which was, how do I just survive this failure of love? How do I just get through this? The challenge is that we take that personality that we've structured into our adulthood, but the mechanisms of denial and repression are still in place. And we confuse the personality, which is our survivor self. Sometimes we just call it ego, when ego is referring to sort of that negative or small or contracted aspect of who we are. And we confuse that with our true self, because in fact we haven't had access to a true self. So we think that's who we are. And then, for example, in my situation, coming out of an ayahuasca ceremony, at 55 years old, the mantra that came out of my mouth when I saw all this, I saw exactly what happened to me. I saw exactly how I structured my personality. I saw the beliefs that came into place. And I kind of staggered out of the maloka and saying to myself, my life has not been my own. Hmm. In other words, it's not been me. I mean, the true me was always there underneath, but I couldn't risk being that authentic self when I was young, because I thought I wouldn't survive it, because it wasn't able to be received. So that's the kind of there are nuances, of course, in this map, but that's what I discovered in these medicines.
Mm-hmm. So you, and again, I would like to later talk about specifically for yourself, where did your, what was the context of your early life that led you to these core unconscious beliefs, like I am bad, I'm too much, I'm not enough.
Right.
But first I want to unpack a little bit more about these core unconscious beliefs, which you call cubs, and the compensatory actions and beliefs. Whew, wow. Okay. And then you also have another thing called leaks. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about leaks, what they are, where they come from, why they come about, and what they might offer us insofar as our own personal growth.
Right. Yeah. So when we get triggered by another person or a life circumstance, and by triggered I mean just something that causes us to react more strongly than the situation actually calls for, those are just emotional triggers. And what's happening in that is that the defense structure that we've put in place to guard us against the feelings associated with these core unconscious beliefs, these triggers create anxiety, because what's happening is intuitively we feel like what's threatened is that we're going to get down, that the fortress of our personality is not going to be strong enough to guard us against the feelings associated with these core unconscious beliefs. And if the trigger is strong enough, what happens is that there's a leak. And so the fortress of our personality, of our ego defense structure of repression and denial, starts crumbling. And there's a leak through to these core unconscious beliefs. And so we actually start feeling, for example, I am bad. I am wrong. It's my fault. I'm too much. I'm not viable in the world. I shouldn't exist. And we start identifying with the feelings associated with those beliefs. And so that becomes us. Like when we're really in this regressed state, we'll feel, it starts maybe just with moodiness, but then it progresses to terrible anxiety, maybe depression, compulsive activity. We'll just feel like there are only two options when we're identified with these beliefs and these feelings. One is to get rid of you, who caused me to feel this. Cause me. You're the cause of this. And so one is to get rid of you, or the other is to get rid of me. So those are, metaphorically speaking, it's homicide. So I'll rage at you. I'll hate you. I'll make you disappear. Or the humiliation and shame about how because I'm identified with these feelings is so deep, it's like I have to disappear. So either you go or I go, but what's intolerable are the feelings themselves. And so that's what happens when, we get into these states where, some people even end up on a psychiatric ward, regress to the point of, because they just feel like, I am these feelings. I am these beliefs. These aren't just a part of me. These represent the totality of who I am. And because we don't have sufficient resources when we're that young, when we experience that heartbreak, a couple of other beliefs that are present are, I'm helpless. There's nothing to be done about this. I'm hopeless. The situation is hopeless. So our resources to creatively imagine some other kind of future that's born of a healthier sense of connected and beloved self, a radiant, beautiful self, just don't come online. And we just feel like we're screwed. There's nothing to be done. I'm stuck. And nobody can help me. And that's the danger of getting stuck in these places, is that you just feel like what is actually just a part of me is the totality of me. It's not actually true, but you don't know it's true. So when people are in these places, I try to teach them to just use the mantra, this is a memory. Mm-hmm. This is a memory. This is a memory. And repeat it until you actually believe it, which effects a differentiation between that terrible state of hopelessness and helplessness and misery and the part of you that recognizes that it's a memory. And this witnessing self can look upon the traumatized self, what I just call the traumatized self. And then you can start asking yourself, well, who is this witnessing self that is observing? And all of a sudden, all of a sudden you recognize that I have these feelings don't have me, and there's just a little bit of light, little bit of liberation there, and then you just keep working with that.
So we get wounded as children, as young children. The state of mind that we're in at the time is sort of infused around those wounds. So we'll just say it's like hopelessness or something, or whatever it might be. And then it's so unbearable. We learn like, oh, I am not good enough, right?
Right.
Then that's not like a conscious decision. It's a sort of deeply intuited understanding that later can be conceptualized as this phrase when we sort of bring that kind of stuff on board. And
exactly.
Right. And then in order to protect ourselves from not only the reality of I'm not good enough, but the consequences as well as the pain, we bring on board these things that we do in order to ensure that we always believe that we are good enough. Say, for example, trying to excel in the world, trying to be better than others. At some point, somebody might, and that would be our cabs, right? Like I'm the best. I'm going to win all the time. I'm going to succeed. Everyone's going to see how good I am. And then
I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be charming. I'm going to be helpful. I'm going to be whatever it is that you need me to be so that I know that I can survive.
Right. I'm going to be mommy's special little boy.
Yeah.
And so that continues on into adulthood. And then we have some experience, I assume likely with somebody who we trust or feel vulnerable with. And what happens is those cabs, something gets through them. And as a consequence, we start to feel the feelings from childhood and the construct of self-understanding that was alive then becomes alive now. We don't realize it's a memory from the past. We think it is exactly what it is. So it's almost like in the present moment, we become an embodiment of our childish selves, our unmatured pain. And then when that comes up, it's so threatening. And we feel so unsafe because that is part of the memory, that we were unsafe to feel our feelings and then know that we were loved through them. We do whatever we can to make those feelings go away without actually feeling them, embodying them
Right.
for what they are. So we rage against the person, or we do whatever against the person that brought it up, blaming them until we can make them go away so that we can feel the problems resolved. We do it against ourselves and then maybe beat ourselves up to a point where we're back in the cab, or we end up, in some sort of psychiatric unit, maybe with a break into a fantasy world like psychosis, or into some levels of actual embodiment of self-harm, into suicide, and what have you. Does that feel like a
Yeah,
good reiteration?
that's really a nice summary of that, James. Thanks. And this is where, before we end up in the hospital, we'll try all manner of substances and processes that we will get addicted to, because then every addiction you can imagine is in service of keeping these feelings down, or making them go away, or not having to feel them. So, we'll smoke cannabis every day. For example, we'll drink, we'll use pornography, we'll be hyper successful at work. We become workaholics. Anything can be utilized. We'll just be constantly on the move. We find ourselves, we can't stop. We just got to go, 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 go. So all of these things are in the service then of not letting these cubs come through, because we have a memory that we can't survive feeling those. So we still feel like if we feel them, we're going to be destroyed. It's not true, but we don't know it's not true until we feel safe enough in maybe the context of psychotherapy, a close friend, in a psychedelic journey, that we have just enough of a taste that, I can feel those and I'm not going to be destroyed. And then we start doing the work of integration, which always, the royal road to healing always comes about through a grieving process. So you start feeling the sorrow, you start feeling the heartbreak, you start feeling the life you've had to relinquish in order to live from a false self. There's grief for your unlived life. It all comes welling up, and you discover that you can actually feel this and not be destroyed. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you come back to your authentic self. And my experience is that if you allow these feelings to have their way with you, you drop into your original beauty, and you actually, what comes online is just a deep compassion for yourself. And all of a sudden, self-compassion is no longer just an intellectual thing. We have to love ourselves, but it's actually a thing. It's actually, it's possible to fall in love with yourself and go, I'm so sorry what happened to you. I won't let this happen again. I'm not going to let you be with anyone who's going to hurt you like that doesn't know how to be tender and affectionate and listen to you and treat you with dignity. That's over. I promise. So with that act of self-compassion, you relieve that little one of this terrible responsibility that he's taken on or she's taken on, that's actually too much responsibility, which leads to anxiety in life, because one of the beliefs that forms out of bearing too much responsibility before you're ready is life is too much to bear. And the thing about those kind of beliefs, that if you unconsciously carry them with you, and you can write whole philosophies about that. The French existentialists did this. It was just like despair. It was meaningless. It was purposeless. My own take on that is that these are memories of a time when our hearts were broken and we weren't resourced there was nobody there to contain these feelings. And so they just linger into adulthood, and then suddenly we find ourselves writing books about how meaningless and purposeless and empty and devoid of, any joy life is.
Right,
But
like intellectualizing away from our pain.
yeah, exactly. It's just like, so that we create the world then. And this is what happens with these core unconscious beliefs. They become not only interpretive filters through which the raw data of experience is run through them. And so by the time it gets through these core unconscious beliefs, we see the world that legitimizes the beliefs themselves. So it is actually hopeless, empirically. It's it's factual that it's hopeless and it's helpless and we're doomed and I'm doomed. And then the second thing that they do is they create that world for us. We create our life situation and our life conditions that legitimizes and validates them. When you say, well, look, this is actually how it is. Look at my life.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So they're insidious, and until we kind of unpack those core unconscious beliefs, what I call the combination of the core unconscious beliefs plus the compensatory actions and beliefs, plus maybe we can get into this later, but the spiritual ego is the trauma signature. And our life just becomes a reflection of our trauma signature. But none of it's true, but we don't know that it's not true.
Well, let's put a pin in that for a second, because I want to step back. I liked what you were saying there about addictions. Reminds me of Gabor Mate, his sort of adage that addiction is not the problem, it's the solution.
Right.
It's the solution to a problem that only just reinforces the problem. And the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And I'm thinking about how I want to talk a little bit about relationship here, and I'm not sure who said this, but I know it wasn't me, which is that, we are wounded in relationship and we heal in relationship.
I think Bruce Sanguin said that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I discovered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, either way, there's sort of two questions forming here, and maybe you'll be able to decipher how to answer this ambiguous double question, which is that we're wounded in relationship, we heal in relationship. We are wounded in relationship early in life because we don't I don't know that I am. I only know that I experience mother. Right. I only know that I experience mother. The role might not be my actual biological mother or even a female, but that is how my self-identity, my self-understanding turns on, is in relationship with her. So wherever her wounds and her failings are to love and support me are the places that will be left behind, will be left wounded in me later. And so it's later when we're able to feel our suffering, that old pain, and feel safe at the same time, either because we feel safe with our own sort of higher witness in a self-compassion way, or safe because we're in a therapeutic relationship, or maybe safe because we perceive, legitimately or not, that we are in relationship with a higher power in some way that's allowing us to feel this pain and know that we are still loved and we're still safe, to sort of finish that. But somewhere in the middle, there is relationships that maybe on some level we want to heal us, but actually just simultaneously reinforce our calves while triggering our cubs. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about these relationships that may or may not seem like they're going to heal us because, there's a part of me that's missing. I can get it with this other person, but that other person only ends up being, the awfully perfect fit for our own issues. And then we end up in, unhealthy relationships. Can you talk a little bit about how we can be guided into these unhealthy relationships by our cubs and calves and what that might look like? I guess that is the question, what that might look like.
Yeah, beautiful. What I think happens in the beginning is that you find another human being that, as you say, it feels like the potential's there for completion. She or he will complete me. But what that really means is that these deficits, these emotional deficits that are a legacy from failures of love, are finally going to be met by this person. And in the beginning, this is the thing about falling in love, it feels like they are. Mm. It's like, oh my God, finally. And so it's like all of that woundedness and all, it's like it's all healed through this other person. The thing that we don't know is that these deficits can never actually be made up for. Mm. They'll never, nobody can make up for that. Once they're gone, they're gone. The only thing to do with them is to grieve them, is just to feel them. Then, once we feel them, we can become conscious of them. And then we can consciously utilize a relationship, an intimate relationship with the other, to heal. We can consciously ask for what it is that would make us feel good with another person. But until we're conscious of them, they're always going to feel like they're completing us, or we have expectations of them that are too large. They just intuitively know that too much is being asked of them. And of course, this is happening both ways. Your partner has the same kind of wounds, and your wounds are like these interacting sensitivities and templates that come together, as you say, perfectly to bring all this up as a kind of exquisite reenactment of your respective trauma signatures. And I think there's some kind of intelligence about this in the universe, actually, that ultimately this is it carries the potential of our healing. I think that's why we meet the right person for this, and the ultimate purpose of that is so that we can heal. But there's no way the other person can heal us. But we unconsciously feel like, finally, like, I was talking to a friend the other day about being in an ayahuasca ceremony, and I was regressed. I was about 2 years old, and I was in terrible pain, terrible sorrow, heartbreak. And then one of the guides, I heard footsteps coming towards me, and from this really young place inside of me said, "Oh, finally, someone's coming to pick me up." I just waited. I was anticipating them, and I couldn't. Oh, finally, I'll be able to. And they walked right on by. And then the next person would come and say, "Oh, okay, well, this person's surely coming to pick someone. For God's sake, someone's coming to pick me up here. They've got to. I mean, I can't. This is terrible. Nobody came to pick me up." And of course, it was this early reenactment. So when we meet someone as adults, that unconscious expectation is that maybe this person will be the person to come and pick me up. Finally, they will comfort me. But because it's unconscious, it's not explicit, and it just becomes a reenactment where we're just triggering each other into these early wounds and leaking into our core unconscious beliefs. And then we start treating our beloved as if they're the enemy and as if they're attacking us. And they become the other who doesn't love us. But of course, that's an early reenactment of that trauma. So nevertheless, as you say, that our hearts are broken in relationship, and therefore our only hope for healing ultimately is in and through relationship. But that only happens through two people who have made decisions to do their own healing journeys. Mm-hmm. And then they can consciously come to the other and state explicitly, "Hey, I'm feeling really miserable. Could you hold me, for a little while?" so I can just kind of relax and breathe. And both people, they know what's going on, and it's fine, it's negotiated. So you can start to be that if it's conscious for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then, my definition of healing is very simple. It's the capacity to deeply relax in the presence of another who you love.
Hmm.
That's it. As soon as you can relax and be yourself, you're healed.
Hmm.
But getting there is not as simple as that.
For sure. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is something along the lines of, and obviously correct me, but everything that you having said and sort of my simple way of understanding it myself is that we come in with these childhood wounds, and there's some sort of mysterious something that's leading us to another person who might meet our wounds so perfectly that it drives us to connect with each other and be very vulnerable with each other so that these wounds can heal. But neither of those people are actually healed. And so what ends up happening is we both show up thinking that we're adults, but we're actually two children expecting the other and perceiving the other as being the incomplete parent, hoping that they will parent us again. But they can't parent us because they're children as well. And so we end up fighting back and forth. We end up codependent, like basically children with each other with no parent in sight, expecting the other to parent. And it becomes, anywhere from a really shitty relationship to a profoundly abusive, abuser victim back and forth sort of situation. And that the only way we can truly heal in relationship is get to the point where we're actually both adults, or adult enough to be able to know when to ask the other person to adult so that we can regress for a moment and adult ourselves with their support, and vice versa. So like finding a secure relationship to grow into. And until we have a sense that we're showing up as children and there's a bunch of like childish reactive wounds inside of us, and we'll have a tendency to see the other as our essentially as all the ways that our parents failed and fucked us up,
Right.
then we're never going to be able to truly grow up and be in that loving relationship. And that has to be a mutual decision, because otherwise the relationship isn't going to move forward in a healing and healthy way. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, sounds just exactly right. Yeah, that beautifully summarized. The only thing I would add is that when you talk about regression, when you consciously ask for what you want and need in the context of one of these a conscious relationship, it's not actually regression. It's just being in your vulnerability. I would just associate regression with unconsciously sort of being that child. So yeah, but yeah, it's a beautiful summary.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. So what about psychedelics in all of this then?
Well, I think, for me anyways, I needed some kind of strong medicine, because what had happened to me is that I had found a woman who I believed to be my soulmate. In fact, I had spent 7 or 8 years. My deepest prayer was that before I died, I would find my soulmate. It was like a sacred longing in me. And then, without going into all the details, it's like one day the universe delivered. And I thought, oh, I'm fucked now. It's like it kind of called bullshit. It's like, okay, dude, are you really up for this? Like, because if I was going to go for it, my life had to be completely dismantled. It was just the nature of how I had constructed my life, that this wasn't going to go down easily with, for example, the church. And I know we're not getting into that yet.
We'll get into that very shortly. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, it was like, here it is. And then we came into a relationship. It was profoundly beautiful. But then I found that I was sabotaging this deep potential intimacy with all this unconscious rage, even hatred. I would cut myself off from intimacy. I would attack. I'd get triggered, all these leaks would happen. I didn't know this was what's going on because I thought I'd done therapy before. This is the thing, right? I thought I was a pretty conscious guy, right? But here I was doing this. So that's what led me to psychedelics. Like I'm not saying they're for everyone, but for me, I had heard, about them, and I kind of needed some strong medicine. And so I went into my first ayahuasca ceremony with just a clear intention, and it was remove in me every obstacle to love. And it was a very innocent and, in retrospect, very naive intention, because I thought, maybe 2 or 3 ceremonies, this would be all cleared up, and
right,
and it's still being worked on. But the medicine, the ayahuasca, the mother was very indulgent of my request and said, okay, let's go. And so then began this journey of where I was shown, as I talked about, the whole shebang, like what had happened to me. And one way to understand it was just a journey into a realization of the deep sorrow that I'd been living with all my life, but had been in denial about. And it took me a fair length of time, because I think the other thing I saw in the medicine was how profound my denial was. Because if you had asked me going into these ceremonies, are you a sad person? I'd say, no, I'm not sad. I'm successful. I'm well-adjusted. I'm an author. People want to be with me, But it revealed all, as this medicine does.
Yeah, I think about ayahuasca, not particularly my medicine so much, but I definitely look at it like a bit of a benevolent monkey's paw. Like there's that old, it's kind of like a horror legend or something about the monkey's paw, and it gives you 5 wishes, and whenever you make a wish, it grants it, but it always grants it in this weird, distorted way. Like if you wish, to be the smartest person in the world, it makes everybody stupid, for example, everybody else stupid, for example. Or if you wish to be, if you wish to be the coolest, the brother that mom loves the most, or the one that gets the most attention, it'll kill your sister or something, And then with ayahuasca, it's like a benevolent monkey's hand. When you're like, my intention is, I wish for you to show me, open up all the blockages to love, that what it ends up doing is showing you all your grief and all your hurt and all your disappointment and all the places where you're wounded, because it's like, oh, that's what you want? Okay, well, I'll help you get there. But it like takes you through the ringer to get there. So I always I think about it that way, as like a benevolent monkey's paw.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love that. And the thing is, like for me too, it wasn't just ayahuasca. I did a series of intensive psychedelic psychotherapy sessions using a combination of MDMA and LSD, which, and that medicine for me was all about healing of intimacy. Whereas ayahuasca was all about just showing me where intimacy had been ruptured. And I was kind of on my own in the ayahuasca thing. It was like I was just stripped. I was dismantled. But the psychedelic psychotherapy actually allowed me to address these issues of trust as I learned to trust someone with my vulnerability. That's how it worked for me anyways.
Right. Maybe you could give us like a high level general, what do psychedelics do in therapy? So we got an understanding now of, the wounds, the cubs, the cabs, the leaks, the whole sort of shebang on a general basis. So, and got a sense of where ayahuasca has come in for you, and a sense of what psychedelics can do, where the LSD and MDMA came in. But looking at healing as a process, taking a step back and generalizing, what are the psychedelics doing to help the healing process, and what is required within the psychedelic experience to encourage this?
Yeah, nice. I think, you can think about it in terms of psychedelics sort of function on this continuum of from trauma at one end to transcendence at the other. And when you have these intense experiences at either end of the continuum, the transcendent experience contextualizes your life so that you drop into a much larger cosmic sense of yourself. These experiences of unity consciousness, and in the words of Christian mystics, you get the sense that despite what's happening, somebody was going down on the earth, and all is well, and all manner of things are well. And it's not that you don't see our collective and personal form, but you do, but it's all contained within a much larger cosmic process that's working itself out and is some kind of evolution in and towards love, which is the heart of the universe. So at that end of the continuum, it helps because whatever you're going through, you realize that it's all being held by love. And it resources you maybe to go to the other end of the continuum, where it peels back the layers of your repression and denial and helps you to look at it with some equanimity instead of getting triggered by it again. You're able to gaze upon it and go, oh, this is what happened. I can touch into it. I can feel it and not be overwhelmed by it, or I can find resources, especially on something like MDMA, which, as you know, is an empathogen and allows you to look at your various forms of heartbreak somewhat dispassionately. Whereas off the medicine, you'd look at them and it would be like, the danger is that you would re-traumatize yourself. But on the MDMA, it's like, oh, okay, I see this, I can talk about it, I can feel what it did to me. And so it gives you the opportunity to integrate these experiences consciously rather than just go back into them and be re-traumatized by them. Yeah, so that's one way of kind of looking at what they do. But I will say this, that I don't think it's the medicines themselves, whether it's ayahuasca, MDMA, LSD, mushrooms, iboga, that, and you alluded to this, that are the key to healing. Because you can have these experiences, have a million insights about the nature of reality and about who you actually are, but then you come out of that experience and you get yourself back into an intimate relationship with one with whom you feel vulnerable because you desire love. Mm-hmm. And all those and if all of that is not integrated, all that trauma is just going to be expressed back in the context of your intimate relationship. Mm. So it really is relationship that heals. It really is, for humans, I think, what twists us and causes so much suffering is that we stopped trusting that the universe is for us. Mm. We came to a conclusion either that the universe is against us and we got to fight bloody hard because we're being attacked all the time, or the universe just doesn't give a shit. It's indifferent. Mm-hmm. And both those two lead to despair.
And both those two are extensions of the early childhood environment in which we came into our sense of being.
Absolutely. And they're expressions of distrust. So this healing journey really is about a journey back to trust. And trust is only real in the context of intimate relationships. Mm-hmm. I can talk about trust forever, mm-hmm. but it's only when I'm sitting across from you or my beloved. And if I can't relax with you, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not trusting.
Hmm. So tell me about the therapist then, because um, I don't think the word attachment has even been spoken yet in the interview, but it's obviously attachment theory either is informing your work or is coincidentally extremely similar, um, and that our early attachment wounds are relational, and that they're playing out in our later relationships, and that in order to heal them, we need to repattern them, and that is kind of what you're talking about, to learn to trust and to be relax and trust and be authentic in a relationship, that we're sort of learning to repattern our attachment wounds, that we say, okay, I don't have to tense up. This person doesn't think that I'm a bad person. They're not going to attack me. I won't be killed if I'm not a good boy with my partner. Like I can relax and trust. And then it's not like that just changes conceptually. That's an ongoing process of actually reshaping the nervous system and patterning how we attach. And I'm wondering, in the context of psychedelic experiences inside of a therapeutic container, what is the role of the therapist insofar as the healing, like the relational healing process?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's a beautiful summary of attachment theory. And I'll just give you an example. I was in a session where I had done, 130 milligrams of MDMA and 300 micrograms of LSD, and I was with my therapist, and in this, it's all. I mean, it's all about trust, right? So at one point, he's just holding me, and I'm breathing, and I'm saying, "Oh, it's so fabulous just to breathe, and just to feel like, oh, this is what it's like to relax." And then I actually break the connection, and well, there's a couple of different sessions here, but I break the connection, and I actually crawl like a toddler away from him, and I say, "You just stay there." So I crawl like a toddler away from him. From the other side of the room, I look at him, just like a toddler will do to test whether or not the person's still there when you go away.
Mm-hmm.
And then I crawled back, found out that he was still there, and then I did it again. And then, I did this about 6 times, but it was all about attachment. Can I leave you and trust you're still going to be there? So that's one experience. And another experience, can I come out of being held by my therapist? Then I end up sitting on top of him and asking him, do you want to be here? Or are you just here because I'm paying you? And then he laughed and he said, what's going on? Like, what are you asking? And underneath all of that was like, do I belong?
Mm.
Do you love me? Or are you just playing a role here? So after this experience of trust, I came out of it, and basically those questions were just like raw expressions of, can I trust that you actually want to be here? Mm. And he looked at me in my condition and said, there's no place in the world that I'd rather be than right here with you right now. Where else would I want to be? Why would I want to be somewhere else? And I believed him. Mm. That's the thing, right? It went in, and I went, holy shit. This guy wants to be with me, and I'm enjoying the hell out of this. There's so much ecstasy and joy in feeling that kind of connection with somebody who actually sees you, can amplify your original beauty, and feed that back to you. And that's all there is to do. What else is there to do? Mm. And then he sees my beauty, amplifies it. I see his beauty in his eyes. It gets amplified, and all of a sudden you're in heaven together. Mm. No place else to be. Well, this is what's supposed to happen between mother and child. The only role of a parent, I say, is to amplify the beauty with which that person brought in with them from this other side.
Mm-hmm. To help them see it in themselves through your eyes.
Be a mirror. Yeah. Just help them to know how beautiful they are. and then it amplifies, and it's bigger and bigger, and that person develops self-esteem and experiences the joy, the sheer joy, the ecstasy of being beloved of someone else, and then loving that other person, and then it's like this. Then it's a little experience of that attachment, that healthy attachment born of trust, is a little experience of nirvana, of heaven, of satori. It's like, this is life. I don't need anything else.
And then that happening in a psychedelic experience can be corrective. So now that's like because I mean the psychedelics, they break down, well, they disintegrate, sort of a technical term, of who, your normal operational ego self. And so it's like things that happen on psychedelics land very deep in the psyche. When things sort of come back up, it's like it takes it down, things get planted, comes back up. And that now you have this deeply planted seed of experience that can be a reference point for the other times in which that quality of connection is being invited or called upon, so that you can then heal that attachment bond in a process over time by going, now I know what it feels like to trust this way very deeply, to feel that beauty, and I can reinforce it into my sense of self and into my behavior by then practicing it in sober state. That's like the integration. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have a new touchstone.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it's a new. It's not even a belief, but it's if you want to talk about it in these terms, that the core unconscious belief that I'm bad is broken down. He says I'm beautiful. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, I am so beautiful. Of course, so are you. And if everybody knew that about themselves at this deep level, there'd be far less trauma and far less violence in the world, because we just want to be a mirror for the other's beauty. Because that's what everybody wants. So absolutely. And then that becomes a new touchstone. For if you go into one of these places, we will be able to more easily call bullshit on if I experience a leak and I go into one of these core unconscious beliefs, these deficit beliefs, and I go, well, actually, no, that's not true, because I've had this other experience. Mm-hmm. And just your brain, your nervous system gets reorganized. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's not that it's forever. It's not not necessarily a permanent condition. That part of you, those core unconscious beliefs, there's a sense they'll be there. They just occupy a smaller place in your life. You'll be able to identify them quicker and go, it's not true. Okay, get over it, dude. Take responsibility for them. Stop blaming others for them. Stop moping. Pick yourself back up and be in your creativity again.
Right. Now is the time to adult, like a verb.
Yeah. Let's adult here.
And this is I mean, there's maybe an opportunity. I don't think the listeners would do this, but I'm gonna point to it. There's an opportunity here to hear what you're saying and interpret it as taking psychedelics makes you a better person, and more LSD, for example, better world. And if somebody were to interpret it that way, they would not be by any means the first person to interpret it. Such experiences as that way, but that's not the case. It's not the psychedelics themselves.
Right.
It's actually the larger context in which psychedelics are being utilized, and that can go in a negative direction as well. And for example, psychedelics can reinforce, say, cabs, or can help shift your cabs into a different form. One of those forms being what you have called the spiritual ego. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. That's profound what you just said, and it's so true. So the spiritual ego is like what happens here is that if you haven't done this work, experienced your heartbreak, grieved, reconnected, come back into trusting relationship with yourself, with others, in spirit, or however you understand that. And in which case your core unconscious belief, your cubs, and your compensatory actions and beliefs are still intact, and you're just going to build a spirituality on top of those, right? So, for example, your core belief, I am bad, is still in place, you've compensated by being a very good boy. Your spiritual ego is like morality. It's like like that. Being a very good boy is seen and interpreted by your spiritual community as like an authentic expression of who you are, but really you're just being compulsively good.
Mm-hmm.
You're not being good in freedom. You're being good because it's driven by, if I'm bad, I'm going to be screwed. So it's being good in the worst sense of the word, as Mark Twain put it.
So it's sort of like before I believed I was bad, so I was good by being a good member of conventional capitalist society. Later, I still believe I'm bad, but I'm being good by practicing Tai Chi and meditating and just always being like one with spirit and just totally trusting the flow of the universe, because that is the only way that I could truly be the most spiritual being. But nothing's actually been resolved, and so those leaks are still going to come up. They'll just take different form, and we might be even less likely to see them because we now have a sense of like, oh, but now I know. Before I was unspiritual, now I'm spiritual, now I'm healed, now I'm enlightened.
Yeah, and it just cements it in. The spiritual path just cements in the cubs and the cabs. Another example is that one of the wounds you're left with is that this sense of I can't be my sovereign individuated self and survive. And then you hear a spiritual teaching about surrender. Right? And then you say, well, I'm surrendered. But the truth is that you've never actually risked differentiation. You've never risked being an individual. And so this is a form of spiritual bypassing, which I just call a flight to unity.
Mm-hmm.
And the source of the flight to unity is the original fear that if I'm myself as a little kid, I can't survive that. So I'm going to be one with the universe. I'm going to be one with Christ. I'm going to be like whatever, I am that. I mean, all these things are valid spiritual expressions. There's an authentic expression of them. But if this work hasn't been done, then they are just cover-ups. And like you said, you can sort of develop an ideological kind of belief that that I've done, now I'm spiritual, and therefore I know this to be true. So it's just a word of caution. You can meditate for 40 years, and if you haven't done this work, you come off your cushion and you'll come back into intimate relationship with your beloved, and you're getting triggered all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to be able to sustain it. And this is why I think there are so many stories of gurus and spiritual teachers that just screw up. They're leaky sexual boundaries. They're acting out all over the place. And because they've just locked in their cubs and their cabs with a spiritual ego.
Right. And maybe they do have, spiritual power to something. Maybe you sit with them and then and you're like blown open in some crazy way. You're like, whoa, this guy is really connected with the transcendental, but then he, utilizes his power to sexually assault you or something. So that it can be there to some degree, but then like sort of held up on these really faulty foundations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like there's a sense in which someone who has not been able to land fully on this planet in their body, they've sort of come from the other side and, through the intuitive body, through the mental body, through the emotional body, and they haven't been able to complete that journey because of trauma, kind of stay up in the intuitive body, close to source, but they never come back. They never actually land on Earth, and so they can speak from that close connection, but because they haven't landed through the mental, emotional, and physical body, when they come into an intimate relationship, they're speaking from a real dissociated place. They're acting from a dissociated place, which can do real harm to the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's take another example of where the spiritual ego might come in. Let's say I believe I am bad, and I'm compensating that for that by being a winner, right? And then all of a sudden, I learn there's this spiritual belief system that says everyone is a sinner, and that we can win by being good spiritual beings according to this external authority. So I see your smile because this touches right into play. And so I'm sort of like leading to this, I guess, a longer form question, which is, what's your story? Cole's Notes, in a way, what's your story from, teenage sports? I think it was like you were winning at sports, to Christian minister, to psychedelic therapy person, to where you are now. We've got a great understanding at this point of what you mean when you say Cubs, cabs, the progress. We've got a sense of what you've gone through. What is the sort of general story? Where were you? Where did you get to? What happened? What have you gone through, and where are you now?
Right.
Insofar as religion and the story of you having been a minister specifically.
Right. Yeah, so I like, as you say, I was like sort of a high-level athlete, very successful at whatever I did, played college volleyball and basketball and then tennis. But I then became obsessed by the question of the meaning of life when I was about 21, which was weird to my jock friends. It's like Sanguin's gone off the deep end. I started into transcendental meditation, and beautiful. I did it for 3 years. And then I got invited to this evangelical rally, Christian rally. And this guy was saying that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him. And I thought, well, okay, if he's the meaning of life, I'll go down this road. Mm-hmm. So I did the whole thing of giving my life to him. And then I decided I'd go to seminary, did a graduate degree in theology in Toronto. Took a few years to emerge out of that fundamentalist theology that I brought in with me, and then was ordained in the United Church of Canada and had a 30-year, successful career. It was like I was, wrote a whole bunch of books about it and traveled around speaking about it, and by all measures, I was a successful guy.
Right. And you were an active minister with a congregation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 28 years. I was like United Church of Canada, 30 years actually, preached every Sunday morning and did baptisms and funerals and weddings and counsel, did pastoral care and, taught, did a lot of teaching. And, I felt it was good. And then, it felt like it was over at some point. And that's the point at which I decided to take early retirement. And then I met my beloved, my soulmate. And then there was a whole shift because she's Jewish, and she's more into, she brought with her this deep indigenous sensibility and spirituality that was earth-based and intuitive and open to the invisible dimensions, and wasn't at all about Christian theology and everything. And so I started opening myself up also to imagining other ways of holding the cosmos and the world. And then I told you about the experience of just feeling like I wasn't really fit for this kind of intimacy that I was being invited into. Mm-hmm. So then there ensued a crisis. Like if I was going to be with my soulmate, I had some deep work to do. So someone told me about an ayahuasca ceremony, and I went, well, that's interesting. And there was a couple of motivations. One was that I was interested in sort of like I'd heard about, maybe I'll have direct access to spirit, to sacred wisdom. And then there was this other, I think, more sort of driving one, which is like, what is going on that I'm sabotaging the answer to my prayer?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the interesting thing for me is once I took early retirement from the church, I never really felt a need to return to it. Although the teachings of Jesus continue to intrigue me, and in and through my psychedelic experiences, I bring new interpretations to that, to the Gospels and what they might mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, before
Yeah.
we go there, I've got a very specific question, and this is just, again, for my own thing here to cut that afterwards. Can you shift your body the other way? The way that you're leaning is causing your shirt, like the mic, to rub against the thing there.
How's that?
That's good. So, all right. So I kind of want to get a sense of what changed for you here, because you went in to, into Christianity, into the institution of religion, as a compensation, as a cab, and then something came up for you in a psychedelic experience, caused you to, reassess your whole life and all your decisions. And I'm curious how you would describe what your cabs in relationship to your success in the church, now having recognized that they were influencing you. Like, what was happening, and how was the church satisfying the reinforcement of those cabs?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly just at a superficial level, this was an opportunity for me to be a really good boy. Like, I could behave well. I could quote unquote be in service and help others. So to the extent that that's a reenactment of early heartbreak, you can see how our little ones have to make the world better for the other in order to be taken care of. So I'll do whatever I have to do to make your world better, so to be assured that I'm going to be safe. So there's a sense in which the whole orientation in a congregation can be like taken care of, just a reenactment of that whole mother dynamic. I'd say the larger thing is that at some point you realize that you are reenacting the precise, dynamics with your biological mother, with Mother Church. Mm-hmm. So I always had this ambivalent relationship with the institution. On the one hand, I needed it to survive, to make a living, my pension. On the other hand, I never really was fully 100% committed to the institution. Mm. And I always thought that was because I was a bit of a rebel. I was a bit, but at core, I think it was because of my ambivalent attachment with my own mother. So I needed it. I needed to stay in connection, but I couldn't really unambiguously commit. So even though I was successful, I was always on the fringes. I was always toying with it. So it's safe to say that virtually every psychodynamic element that I went through in relation to my mother got played out in the context of church, including when it came time to leave. There was this deep unconscious rage that I had carried with me all my life, that when someone crossed me, I would very quickly just go, fuck you, I don't need you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my leave taking in the church was a bit complicated because um, I had made a decision at the same time to leave my marriage, and there was a handful of people who didn't like it. They started making noise, and that part of me, instead of kind of staying engaged with them and talking through it, I just went, fuck you.
Right, right.
I'm out of here. Which again, the underlying thing was fuck you, mother.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing gets played out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now,
So
did the church, now correct me if I'm wrong here, the church was not the thing that led you to your healing. Do you think that's a fair assessment? I don't mean the religion, the relationship to God. I mean the community of the church and how you were engaging with it didn't bring you to your healing.
no,
No, okay. Do you feel that, and this doesn't need to be a specific example, that this is not a damning example of all Christian institutional churches, but do you feel that what you see in a lot of the churches is a place for people to heal, or a place for people, whether they be at the, I don't know what you call the podium in a Christian church, or in
pulpit.
the pulpit or in the pews, that they're actually places to more so play out cubs and cabs than they are to bring forth any meaningful transformational healing. Do you think that's a fair assessment of most institutionalized Christian churches right now?
It's absolutely fair. In fact, this is my observation that like at a deeper level, what most people, at a soul level, they come to church because they want transformation. People really do want transformation. Like they know. It's like we all know we live in the matrix, and we all know we want to take the pill that's going to get us out of it. So one of the places we go is to the church. Unfortunately, when you compare and contrast, for example, what happens in an ayahuasca ceremony and what you undergo, the ordeal that you undergo to clear away all the stuff so that you can live from your heart, and what happens in the context of a Sunday morning service as a different kind of ceremony, there's virtually no comparison. My belief is that people show up at church and they're kind of hoping maybe we're going to get that. Maybe I'm going to be invited to undergo an ordeal and an initiation into a whole new possibility for human 2.0. Because that's really what I want. Because what I've got going here, is just, it's just not like doing it for me. So, but it never happens. It rarely happens. It's just, there's a bishop named Barbara Brown Taylor who tells a story of, her husband never went to church with her, but he went to Sundance ceremonies of local indigenous people. And these are very rigorous, as you know. Sweat lodges, dancing for 4 days, fasting, it's very rigorous. So he goes at the end of the week, she brings her church casserole at the end of that ceremony, sees this figure walking towards her from about 200 yards away. The guy's emaciated, eyes are on fire. He gets closer and she realizes, holy smokes, that's my husband. His first words to her upon meeting are, your church is too easy.
I laughed out loud when I read that part in your book. Honestly, I thought it was great.
Yeah, right. So, I don't want to, like you. I spent 30 years in a church. There's good people doing good things for the world, but for whatever reasons, like I felt in the last 10 years of my ministry myself, something's missing, and I started talking about we got to start doing shadow work. Like something's going wrong here, because people get together, if they haven't done this work of clearing up cubs and cabs and getting at their trauma signature, the community life just becomes a shit show. because it's all these interacting sensitivities, and you get in conflict, and then it's organized around the most neurotic personalities, and so I kept talking about the core practice. Never mind prayer, meditation, contemplation, all good things, but the core practice is we got to get at this other stuff. But to be honest, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to get there, and it's over for me. But if I had any advice for a new person, it was like learn a little bit about what we're talking about, and make your community a safe space so that people can feel safe enough to be dismantled. Because after all, that's what Jesus was talking about. It's like, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to shift gears, or ask a specific question. If you have something you want to finish saying there, please do.
No, that's good. Yeah, no, I'm good.
I think it's fair that most of the people who are going to listen to the show, most of my listening constituency, is probably people on a spectrum from they understand that religion, institutionalized religion, isn't for them, to people who flat out maybe hate it or despise it. But there might be people who are still sort of in the midst of church or whatever that are listening specifically because it's you talking and they've heard about you. And it's probably fair to say that, anyone that knows about Christianity knows that Christianity is not one thing, and that different churches have a variety of different ways of showing up, and that even in some of them, people do have transcendental type experiences. Like, it's all over YouTube, some of the most hilarious, like, what do they call it? Televangelist kind of stuff, and people are screaming, and my mother went to she's Pentecostal, and so I would go to a Pentecostal church when I was a kid, and I would see people look like they were in a trance. I didn't understand it. They were shaking and whatever. Maybe they're feigning, playing the role, whatever, but maybe they're transcendental. But without the shadow work, there's a very good chance that'll only just reinforce the spiritual ego in the same way that taking psychedelics might reinforce the spiritual ego if it's not held in the right context. Do you feel like that's a fair statement?
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the key. And we shouldn't therefore assume that, for example, that people are doing lots of ayahuasca ceremonies or are necessarily doing the kind of thing that we're talking about here. There's enough spiritual bypassing and flight to unity in those ceremonies as well. It's rigorous work, and I think these medicines give people the opportunity to do this work, but it's a whole nother conversation, James, but there's a lot of rhetoric around forgiveness, for example, in ayahuasca ceremonies that I think represent sort of a premature flight to unity. Mm-hmm. When this trauma starts coming up, and for example, then there's an assumption that's, well, naturally you just have to forgive what happened to you. Well, people, they're just discovering it. Like, give them a little bit of time to integrate this. And so I've got a slightly different take than the Christian take on forgiveness, but maybe that can be for another conversation.
Right. Or for the listeners who are, and I imagine there'll be a lot of them very interested in what you have to say here and would love to dive a lot deeper into your work by reading your book. I do have one final question. Thinking back to who you were before this all started, somewhere at like the peak of the I'm a good boy, look at my success in the church, to where you are now. Going back to that place, how would you have then at that time understood what God is and what it means to be a religious person? And then I want you to contrast with today. What do you see what God is and what it means to be a religious person, having gone through everything?
Well, that's a brilliant question. I think the honest thing to say there is that I had the intuition then that it's a bit of a cliche, But I always had the intuition that never left me that God is love, that the source out of which universes emerge and continue to evolve and emerge is at the center of it all is this unfathomable love. And I always had a sense that that was about, but then I experienced it. And the reason I couldn't experience it before is I didn't know what it meant to love myself, and I didn't know what it meant to love another. And in and through the psychedelic experiences, my heart opened. And then, because obviously if your heart's closed, you can talk about this stuff, right? But then I got my heart just torn wide open. And then I knew what I meant by those words, God is love. So it's just like a direct experience of it, and gained by some grace the capacity then to feel love for another and feel love for myself. And that, by some grace, if I'm able to organize my life around living with an open heart, this lifetime will have been worthwhile.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bruce. To send us home, or to send us to wherever we're going after this podcast is over, the listeners, why don't you let us know where we can find out more about what you're doing? So website, social media handles, and the name of your book, and where we can buy it.
Thanks. So the book is called Dismantled, How Love and Psychedelics Broke a Clergyman Apart and Put Him Back Together. Amazon's a good place to go for that. I have a website, brucesanguin.ca, my name.ca. I have a psychotherapy practice, and I live on an island in Pacific Northwest, but I do a lot of work via Skype and telephone. And just to let people know, also people make pilgrimages to the island where I live to do intensive psychedelic journeys with me. So that's entirely possible. And if they want to contact me about any of that, they'll just go to the contact page on brucesanguin.ca.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bruce. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, James.
And cut. So yeah, I hope you appreciated this interview with Bruce Sanguin as much as I appreciated reading his book and having the interview and producing it for y'all. If you would like to learn more about Bruce, you heard those links. I'll make sure they're contained in the show notes to this episode on jameswjesso.com, episode 98. And go check out his book, Dismantled. It's really good. Like, read it and share it with all your friends. I feel like we're all going to be better people, better adults, and have better quality relationships if we at least, get a bit more familiarized with the content of this book. I mean, through this podcast or just through, the larger field of information that he's a part of. Finally, signing off, thanks to everyone who helps support the show, because your likes, comments, be them on Facebook or Twitter or on the ATTMind subreddit, ATTMind podcast, are really appreciated, and as well as the financial contributions of my patrons and of people leaving one-time PayPal donations and people who buy merch on the shop. All of those options are at jameswjesso.com/support. Please head over there. Links are in the description to help support the show. Really appreciate that. Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Well, signing off. Soon we'll be at the 100th episode, and I have something special planned for you. But there's one more episode in between, and that's coming up in 2 weeks from the release date. Every other week, enjoy an episode of Adventures Through the Mind. Like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. See you then.